Hi everyone. So today we're going to start learning about our neighbors to the north, Canada. If you know anything about Canada, then you know a lot more than most people in the United States because even though we don't know much about Canada, they know a lot about us. They know our politics, our entertainment, they watch our TV, all sorts of things. But hopefully we're going to start learning about them. So the title of the chapter is Developing a Vast Wilderness, and today we're going to be looking at the map of Canada and also at the history and the government of Canada, and that is section 1. So let's get started first with the map. You could use this too to fill out the map assignment that I gave you. So if you kind of want to do the two at the same time, hopefully you're watching the lecture before you do the map. So let's go through and look at the map. First a blank map, and then we'll start filling it in. All right, students, when I normally teach this in the classroom, we have a couple of mnemonic devices that I want to teach you. It's going to be hard for me to do that because I have to try to use the mouse to write on here, so it may not work very well. But anyway, so I'm going to try to write here. I want you to know the mnemonic device BASMOC. B, see, I told you this is going to be tough. B, A, S, M, O, Q. Okay, so BASMOC. And the reason that we're going to do that is when you look at these, the provinces. So Canada has provinces, and all of these are down here, right? These are like states in the United States. So these are provinces, and what they have, they kind of have their own independent government. They function a lot like a federal system that we have, where you have the federal government and then you have the state governments. But before many of our states in the United States became states, they were territories, so they didn't have the same legal status. So up in the north, up here, you have what's called the territories, right? And there are 3 of them, and they're huge. So I want you to use this mnemonic technique, BASMOC, to know the provinces. So you start over here. This one's British Columbia. It starts with a B, right? And then next you have Alberta, so an A, oops. And then Saskatchewan with an S, and then Manitoba, right? Ontario, and then Quebec. All right. So that's for the big ones. And then over here along the coast, along the Atlantic coast, these are the coastal or maritime provinces, and there are 4, and they're small. This one and this one together, that's Newfoundland. And then this little bitty island in here, there's an island, that's Prince Edward Island. And then this is New Brunswick. It borders Maine. And then down here, this is another island, but this is Nova Scotia, right? So those are there. Also, there are 4 cities that you need to know. One of them is here. This is the largest city in Canada. That's Toronto. And then this is the capital right here. That's Ottawa. And then there's another city that's right here along the St. Lawrence River. And that is Montreal. And then up here, this is the capital of Quebec, and that's Quebec City. So here's another mnemonic device as we go up there that I always use for students. We learn the mnemonic device of Tom Q. Okay, so we got our friend Tom Q. So that stands for Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec. So hopefully by learning BASMOC and then Tom Q, at least you'll know the majority of the provinces and then also the name of those major cities. So on the next slide, we're going to start looking at all of these different locations. There's more on there than what I required you to identify, but this will help you if you want to do your map at the same time. Okay, so same map of Canada. So we're going to fill in, and I'm not exactly sure what comes in first. So we'll go through this. All right, so Hudson Bay, huge bay up there. It's named after Henry Hudson. So is the Hudson River in New York City. Henry Hudson sailed for both the Dutch and for the British, and what he was looking for was a Northwest Passage, a way of getting to Asia by going through North America without having to deal with North America. So he's up in Hudson Bay, and this is where his life ended because his crew mutinied on him, and they threw him and his son and some sick people into this boat, didn't give them any weapons, any food, and just set them on their way. And so Hudson is still somewhere in Hudson Bay. I don't know if he still exists or not, but anyway, interesting story about Hudson Bay. This is Baffin Bay up here, and that separates Canada from um, Greenland, and then also there's Baffin Island right there. Okay, and then this is the Labrador Sea. It's off the coast of Newfoundland. We've got the Beaufort Sea. You're not going to have to identify any of these except for Hudson Bay. The Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. I still get a lot of students who don't know the difference between those two. Right, this is the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and this opens up right here because this is going to be the St. Lawrence River, a very important waterway in Canada and also somewhat for the United States. Okay, so that right there is the St. Lawrence River. We have Vancouver Island. It's interesting, we have Vancouver Island over here in that town down here at the end of it. That's Victoria, but Victoria Island is, I think it's this one right here. We'll see. So you got Victoria on Vancouver Island, and then Vancouver is in British Columbia. Okay, so yep, there's Victoria Island right there. Baffin Island, as I told you. Queen Elizabeth Island. There are thousands of islands up there, and oftentimes a lot of it is covered in ice pack. You know, so it's or glaciers because it's in the Arctic. Right, and then we have Ellesmere Island. Newfoundland, that is a province that is over there, and they always say Newfoundland, even though it looks like Newfoundland. This was found by Leif Erikson, as you're going to see. Okay, and then the capital of Newfoundland is St. John's. This is Halifax, right here, which is the capital of Nova Scotia. Right, so Nova Scotia is the province, and Halifax is the capital. This is Prince Edward Island, and the capital of Prince Edward Island is Charlottetown. And then this is New Brunswick, and the capital of New Brunswick is Fredericton, spelled really kind of weird. Okay, this is Quebec. In French, you say a QU as a K sound, so it's Quebec. And the capital of Quebec is Quebec or Quebec City. Quebec was established just 1 year after the British landed at Jamestown. So that was in 1608. The French came down there and established Quebec. And then Ottawa is the capital of all of Canada. So that's their national capital. This is Toronto. It is the largest city in Canada, and it's also the capital of Ontario, which is a province. And then coming over here, you have Manitoba, right, which is the province, and its capital is Winnipeg, and it's just south of Lake Winnipeg, a huge lake that is right there. There's quite a few lakes, and notice this is just north of Minnesota, near the Great Lakes. So a lot of these lakes were left over through the last ice age with glaciers melting and receding. And then this is Saskatchewan. There's Alberta, but we'll get to the capital in a minute as we go through. I don't know if we identify Saskatoon. It doesn't look like it, but the capital is Regina, which is down there in the south. I'm not sure why it doesn't come in now. Okay, there's Edmonton up there, and then there is also Calgary. So Calgary is the capital, and then Edmonton is a major city. Nope, take that back. Edmonton is the capital. Calgary is a major city. This is British Columbia. Not many people live up in the northern part there because it's mountainous and it's really remote. Most people live down in the very beautiful city of Vancouver, which is its capital down there. It's not very far actually from Seattle or Tacoma in Washington State, but it's very beautiful and they have a mild climate. You have the marine West Coast climate that's there. This is Yukon. That is a territory. It's very cold. That border right here, they have on the west side, right here, that borders Alaska. There are also a whole bunch of islands that are located here, which belong to the United States, but it's not shown here. So that's Yukon, also the site of a huge gold rush in the late 1800s. The capital of this territory is Whitehorse. Then you have the Northwest Territories, and the capital of the Northwest Territories, and they say it territories instead of territory, so this is a mistake. Make sure you spell it right on the map portion to get it correct. But anyway, that's Yellowknife, the capital there. There is Montreal, a large city in Quebec. Third, I think it's the second largest city in Canada. This is Nunavut. It is a new territory since 1999 for the Inuit people. And their capital is Iqaluit, which is on Baffin Island. It's located right here. Right, there's their capital. I need to fix this map. There is Regina, the Rocky Mountains, the Canadian Shield. This is an area all along Hudson Bay that's real rocky, right? So you have shallow soil and it's cold too. There's a lot of bogs as well. Let's see if there's anything else that comes up. The Great Plains that run up along the United States and Canada. And that's it. And so here you can see this is the capital of Nunavut. And it's spelled, I think it's spelled Iqualit, Iqualit. But it's in your textbook. All right, so here you have all the different provinces and territories that you can see a little bit better than the other map that I provided the last two slides. All right, so section 1, we're going to look at the history and the government of Canada and kind of how they came to be. All right, if you look at the first Canadians, it's much like the first Americans. They came across the Bering Sea. There's DNA evidence, though, that a lot of the indigenous populations did not come from like Siberia or Eurasia, but rather down from the Polynesian islands that are in the Pacific to the east of Australia. So we don't know for sure. But we do believe anywhere from 10 to 40,000 years ago, people started to come and populate what is now North America. And then they went all the way down into Central America, South America, down to the tip of South America down there. These people lived as nomadic hunters. The Inuit today, they are kind of semi-nomadic. For the most part, they live in small rural communities, but then they go out and they hunt. Most of them rely upon the market for their food. The Inuit, there's a group of people known as the Inuit, even though there are a lot of different Native American groups, and they call them First Nations rather than Native Americans, as we do here in the United States. And they're located throughout Canada, and they have different tribal names. But it's the Inuit that live in the north. We used to call them Eskimos, but they consider that a pejorative, so it's kind of an insult to be called that. So they would prefer Inuit instead. But anyway, they do now have permanent settlements. Many of them located where they can grow crops, but the Inuit, they can't grow crops because it's on permafrost, and so they only have a very narrow or very shallow soil up there, plus the growing season is so short. So as you're going to see from the video quiz, food and the acquisition of food is very important for those people living up in the Arctic. Okay, so this is the route. It's believed that the indigenous populations came, and of course they wouldn't have been indigenous either. They would have been immigrants too. So this would have been in the Ice Age. We don't know, as I said, for sure. They might have come from this direction, from the southern Pacific. Okay, so we do have evidence, though, that way before Christopher Columbus, like 500 years before Christopher Columbus, the Vikings came to what is today Canada. Some even say that they came to New England or even Minnesota, Wisconsin, Great Lakes. We don't know. They were great sailors, adventurers. There was like this mini warming period around that time where you had a period of global warming, and these people in what is now Sweden and Norway were kind of branching out to other locations, and they call them the Vikings. But they came, Eric the Red, he settled in Greenland. He had been exiled from the Vikings because of murder. So he comes along, they settle there, and then his son, Leif Erikson, he moves a group of people to a settlement in what is today Newfoundland. So this was known as Vinland, and it was called that because it has these wild grapes on vines, right? And I'm going to butcher it with my French here, but Lons Meadows, right? There's a place that was excavated by archaeologists and historians in the 1960s and 70s to kind of recreate the settlement that they have there. They abandoned it probably because there weren't enough natural resources for them there. The environment is pretty harsh. But here you can see all the different places where the Vikings went out in the 900s and 1000s, right? They went kind of raped, pillaged, and plundered throughout Europe, and then they went up to Iceland, and then right up in here, Iceland, and then Greenland, and then over here, this is Newfoundland. Right here, that is Canada. This is Baffin Bay, right there. So I think I have a picture here of where they went. I do. So they built homes like this. If you go up to Door County in Wisconsin, there's Johnson's Swedish restaurant, and they have grass on the roof there, and they have goats up there that eat the grass. But they put this up there. It's kind of similar to sod houses that they had out on the prairie here in what is now the United States. But people built their homes out of what they could. So they had rocks there, and then they would build the rocks, stack the rocks up, and then put sod on the roof, and then that would provide the insulation. They'd mount it up like this. So that is the excavation site, what historians believe this Viking settlement would have looked like. Okay, and that's where it was located, right up there in Newfoundland. All right, so the Vikings had been here, but then, and other Europeans had too. You've got the Irish and others who were coming over, and they were fishing on the very great water of the Grand Banks. But then the French, they started to come and colonize in the 17th century, much like the English and the Dutch and others. So the guy that explored for the French, he's a man by the name of Samuel de la Champlain, and he's known as the father of New France. There's a lake in Vermont, a big lake called Lake Champlain. It was also named after this guy. Anyway, he explored there, and he established Quebec in 1608. So after he came, more and more French people started to come, but they were small in numbers, very different than the British. The British would come in these whole huge families. The French came just a few people at a time, and these people were voyageurs. They were fur trappers and hunters, and they intermingled with the indigenous populations, the Native Americans. They married them. And they traded with them. They had close relationship with them, but it was very devastating because they brought these diseases that spread, these pandemics that spread through the population of the indigenous people here. So it was just like it was here in the United States. Also, the difference with the French is their big thing is that they wanted to prophesize Catholicism. So these monks came over and they wanted to teach them English and convert them to Christianity. And so they did that. All right, so the French came in and they settled this area that is in the blue on the map, and they called that New France. The only problem with that, you can see where the red is in the red on both sides of the French was claimed by the English. So what's going to happen is they're going to have conflict down in here, this area. It's hard to see with the red. This area known as the Ohio Valley, right? So when they have this conflict there, it's going to erupt into the French and Indian War. The British are going to win this war, and they're going to take all of the French territory. Notice to the south in Spanish Florida and in Mexico, this is all New Spain. So the Spanish have that territory, the French have the blue territory, and then the British have the red territory. Okay, so as I told you, it erupts into the French and Indian War. It's known here as French and Indian. In Europe, it was known as the 7 Years' War. So it broke out in the Ohio River Valley. So George Washington was sent to evacuate the French from the Ohio River Valley. And when he goes down there, fighting breaks out, and that starts the French and Indian War. Initially, it was very bad for the British, and it was very, very expensive, but the British eventually defeated the French at the Plains of Abraham up near Quebec, or in Quebec, right? And they take control of all of French territory in North America. Right? So we have the French there and the British. But when the British take over and they take control, they create the Dominion of Canada, and all sorts of British people start pouring into Canada. And so there's British influence, but there's French people who remain, so they're there too. Now, Canada is not going to get complete independence until 1931. The Queen is kind of still the symbolic leader through the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, but we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Okay, so this is all still that was part of the British Empire at its height in the 1920s. But slowly over time, and especially after World War II, all these countries got their independence. India would get their independence, Australia, of course, and then all those locations in Africa. But in a lot of these places, they still speak English. Right? So this is the British Commonwealth of States. They have a loose association with England, even though England doesn't have power over them. All right, so there is steps towards unity in Canada following the French and Indian War, because you have the French who are Roman Catholic, and then you have the British who are Protestants. The French, of course, speak French, and then the English speak English. So there's a lot of dissension and conflict between these two groups of people that are left in Canada. So the people who are in Lower Canada, those are the English-speaking people, and the people who are in Upper Canada, Ontario, those people speak British. And here is a map. I don't know why upper is actually lower and lower is actually upper. Well, actually, I do. If you look at it right here, they based it on the St. Lawrence River. And so people who are here, they're below the river, and then the ones here, they're above the river. And then they kind of venture out into other locations. So Lower Canada they speak French, and Upper Canada speaks English, and there's a conflict there. So what's England to do? Some of the people who are from Acadia, which is over here, rather than being part of the British Empire and pledging their loyalties, they left, and they became known, instead of Acadians, they became known as Cajuns, and they went down to Louisiana, and that's why there's this strong French influence down there. All right, so anyway, what they started to do is expand. You can see Lower Canada there in yellow and Upper Canada in the reddish color, right? And then they started to spread and expand westward, just like the United States did. Excuse me. So anyway, 70,000 remained there, more immigration from England, and then what we're going to get is the Dominion of Canada, and what it creates is a confederacy, right, where they all kind of have their own independence, but they come together with this loose association. So they're self-governing, but part of the British Empire. The one thing about the British is that they allowed self-government in almost all of the areas that they colonized. But anyway, they start growing very rapidly in the West, and then they gain control of an area that would be around Manitoba or Ontario, Western Ontario, today known as Rupert's Land, and more people go out and they settle on the frontier, right? So you can see this in the map on the top left, where we get Rupert's Land that comes in there. You've got the two different upper and lower Canadas, but then you've got Rupert's Land as well, which is located right here. There's Rupert's Land. So expanding that way, and that was in the 1600s. And then by 1867, you can see they've got Rupert's Land. It's like a territory at that time. You've got British Columbia and you've got the Northwest Territories. So it's very different. Then as we go on today, you can see how those areas in the map on the right were divided up. So Rupert's Land becomes Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and then the Northwest Territories, you're going to get the Yukon, Northwest Territories, also Alberta, and then Nunavut. So it's really kind of divided up. And who's to say it's not going to continue to be divided in a similar manner? All right, so to bring the country together, they did what we did, only they did it like 10 years later. They're going to get the Transcontinental Railroad. The construction began in 1872, and what this does is it links up Montreal all the way over there along the St. Lawrence River to Vancouver, which is on the coast of the Pacific, essentially. All right, and then just like gold was found in California in 1849, like 50 years later, gold is discovered up in the Yukon, and people just poured in there despite the fact that it was very, very cold. So you got gold, but then there are other minerals as well, zinc, copper, and silver. And so this brought about rapid expansion, just like it did with California. So towns pop up and railroads as well. There aren't that many towns up there today. It's very rural. Okay, but you can see from these images, people are going there. The big gold mine was the Klondike region, right? So here, up in that area. And this is along the Yukon River, right? That's up in, I guess, central Yukon territory. You can see all these big Wild West towns, or this big Wild West town, and then people hiking up the side of that mountain to go and mine for gold. Would have been rough. I don't know if you've ever read the short story To Build a Fire. It was Jack London, and talked about these guys who were up there at this time. This guy kind of is going through the wilderness to get to their base camp. I'm not going to tell you what happens because you might want to read it sometime. Okay, so we do get some growth. You get urban growth and industrial growth. There, a lot of people settle in urban areas, but as they expand, it's more industrialized and it's more urbanized, just like the United States, right? Most of the manufacturing takes place within 100 miles of the United States, and there's a reason for that. It's warmer. The land is more productive because it has a longer growing season, and also transportation links are better because they export most of their goods here to the United States. So they're very dependent on us economically. They also import a lot from us as well, right? So that is why they're 100 miles from the United States. A couple more slides. All right, so government of Canada is similar to England, right? They are a commonwealth, but they have a parliamentary system. We've got separation of powers where we have an executive branch, legislative, and judicial. They have a parliament. So what you get is the person who is chosen by Parliament from the majority party becomes that person's prime minister. So in our country, that would be Nancy Pelosi, and there wouldn't really be like an executive branch, but that person acts as the executive, right? So in their Parliament, they have a Senate and a House of Commons. The Senate is appointed, but then the House of Commons is elected. So it's like an upper house and a lower house. Then you have the prime minister. We're going to be talking about him in subsequent sections, and that person's the head of the government. And then the provinces have have a legislature and a prime minister as well, and each of their smaller. You have a provincial prime minister, right? So it's kind of like a governor. Okay, so here are the provinces. We already talked about them: Alberta, Montreal, Newfoundland, Ontario, British Columbia, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Quebec. And you could see the license plates from people from Canada. They'll say the name of the province on there, just like we have the name of the states when they drive around here, the United States. And then the federal government administers the territories, but then the territories have like mayors too, and you might have a territorial governor, but I don't know what they call them. And finally, that's the last slide. Okay, so this was not too long, 30 minutes. I'll see you next week, and we'll try to get through sections 2 and 3. Thanks for listening.